Thank you all for joining us. Sorry for the slight delay on our end as we get everything together. Again, we really appreciate you all being here. Again, we duly appreciate the fact that you're allowing us to roll with the punches. This is our first of hopefully many annual fundraisers. This is a very exciting time for us. We're thrilled to be surrounded by friends and family and exciting new people to collaborate with. We're going to just jump right into things as we're running a little bit late on the schedule. So thank you all for your patience. Just quickly to explain the format here before we get into it, feel free to continue to ask questions in the chat like I've been mentioning, and we'll address those throughout the discussion. If we could, to start this off right proper, Mary, would you mind doing a land acknowledgement for us?
Well, not only would I not mind, I'm really so pleased you asked me, because this, of course, is a special weekend. On Monday, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. And so it's really a pleasure to make this land acknowledgement. Before European settlement, the Lenape people lived here. Lenape means people in their language. I don't want to leave it at that, because these are not people who have disappeared. There were several forced marches that sent them to Indiana and Kansas and Oklahoma. And today, Lenape people, they belong to the Delaware Nation, and even their lands were stolen, even their name. Delaware comes from Lord Delaware, who's a British guy. And the white people basically renamed them the Delaware Nation, and that's the name they use today. They're in Oklahoma and in Wisconsin and in Toronto, Canada. They still have a very strong culture. You can go to their website of the Delaware Indian people, and you'll see that they keep many of their traditions, including, I believe that John said we are going to have Three Sisters, which is a food that is corn, winter squash, and climbing beans, which is always was a staple. And they're also known for basket work and pottery, and they live in abundant lands. Manhattan was a gorgeous area. It was one of the world's biodiversity centers of turtles. It had billions of oysters and clams and fish. And then in the uplands, there was, of course, venison. And so the Lenape people moved around. And but I want to also say that many indigenous people live in our area. One example is the Shinnecock Nation, which has many tribal members living in the New York metro area. And there's also a reservation on Eastern Long Island. I think that it's really an important part of Indigenous people's gift to us, is their inspiring care for the earth and all its inhabitants. And put on your calendar, if you want to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day in a meaningful way, the Climate Museum has a pop-up space in Soho at 120 Worcester Street, where 3 Shinnecock leaders will present a panel about climate change and the threat to our future. Because their reservation is actually, they got pushed from the uplands down to a little fragment along the sea. So I was long-winded, but I don't like sentimental land acknowledgements that don't really delve into how important Indigenous people are, not only from the past, but in the present and our future.
Not at all. We really appreciate the context. And if anything we can make time for it, certainly that. So thank you very much for that, Mary. Just to break into things really quickly. Again, it bears repeating. Thank you all for coming here, both in person as well as digitally. We will make sure this recording is available for those that couldn't make it. I unfortunately regret to inform that due to an unforeseen accident, one of our panelists was not able to make it, but she sends her best, and hopefully we can have her next year. But we still have some amazing people here. For those of you that have not had, we have not had the pleasure of collaborating with, to give a little context, my name is Max Lerner, him. I am the Executive Director of GROW Externships, and I'll be the moderator for this discussion. I'm really thrilled. This is so part and parcel to our organization. This panel explaining diversity and inclusion within the sciences, which takes so many different forms, is really at the heart of GROW Externships, which, to give just a bit there, is a program developed with the goal of helping developing professionals get experience in the field, get paid experience, get context, get to work with practitioners all over the world, and to really bootstrap their careers. There's a lot of amazing people that are thrilled about this field. There's a lot of talent attrition because hard to get invested and involved in such a new field. And dually, not only are we trying to aid people that are coming up in their professionalism, but we're trying to diversify the spectrum of people that are getting in that. We really want to make sure, and this is at the heart of this discussion, that as we find new ways to steward and oftentimes just leaning on former ways that we're just rediscovering now to steward the land, that we want to do so in a diverse and representative way. It's all our planet, and if we are to truly address the challenges of climate change, address the challenges of modern sustainability and resiliency, we need to have a representative group of experts and people to create a social science space that's representative of society. So here we're talking with several panelists that are absolute experts, and it's such a thrill to have you guys joining us. If you would please take some time to just introduce, maybe we'll just go down the line. If you want to introduce yourself first, Mary.
Sure. My name is Mary Pearl. She, hers, are my pronouns. I have had a long career as a wildlife conservationist. I did my dissertation research on the social behavior of Himalayan rhesus monkeys, and I lived for 2 years round the year following monkeys, sort of doing the Jane Goodall thing, but rhesus monkeys. But one of the things I noticed was well, I'll tell you more later when I introduce my topic, but I live very close to the land and became acutely aware of what was at risk. Since then, I have worked as a wildlife conservationist, first at World Wildlife Fund, and then I was at the Wildlife Conservation Society. And then I ran my own organization, now known as Eco Health Alliance, before it was Wildlife Trust, where we built careers of local scientists all around the world in conservation biology. And we also examine the relationship between environmental change and disease emergence. And I hate to say we saw it coming, but we did. We saw this coming 20 years ago, the pandemic, and we're just gotten over, you know, this is going to be a feature of our future, unfortunately, just as with climate change and disease emergence are inextricably combined as well. And as well, find out from our discussions, this affects people differently around the world. And my most recent career, I moved from managing wildlife conservation research organizations to higher ed, particularly public higher ed. And my most recent gig was as Dean of Macaulay Honors College of the City University of New York, which to my great pleasure is a highly diverse institution where we affect transformations of really brilliant people from every sector of our community here in New York. So GROW, just as soon as I heard about it from a Macaulay grad, Janet, and I thought this is the kind of organization that really has a positive role to play. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Of course. It's like a homecoming. Well, I'll explain why, but it definitely feels like a homecoming. I'm really humbled to be here and have folks come today. My name is Kiana Mickey. I'm a food systems and equity consultant. I have in recent years started a nonprofit that is built to operation or help groups, nonprofits, community leaders, and farmers to operationalize equity, to make better, stronger, resilient, and equitable connections to their food systems, to business. I have a background in solidarity economy. So there's work that I've done on the city level, state, federal, and oftentimes international level around food and farm policy, but not just to be a wonk. I'm not a policy wonk, so people aren't disappointed, but really trying to find ways to take what, the policies that really govern our lives, the food we eat, our neighborhoods, our ecosystems, and trying to find ways to amplify folks on the ground, amplify lived experiences, traumas, and equities, and finding ways to divest from that and make it feasible, make it sustainable, and make it authentic. I feel like that's what I try to bring to the work that I do. Some folks know me from my time at Just Food. I started as a community advocate, working and volunteering around food issues and had gotten into food concerns for myself personally and being a mom. And I took an advocacy course, and that course led to, it was farm bill time, and I was like, wow, I want to still stay involved. And that's really where my connection to policy started. So over the years, I went from being a volunteer at Just Food. There's a couple of steps that we'll probably connect. I'll try to weave later, but I eventually started running the nonprofit. So I did that for 3 years, and I turned the nonprofit along with our partners to really make it from what it had been. It was a historically white-led food justice or food security nonprofit, and really try to turn it into what it should be, which is like a community-driven model of and by the people. So when I left it with good stewards that are community gardeners, CSA leaders, and policy and change makers. And that's where I'm at now.
Excellent. We actually have one more speaker joining us remotely, and very generously so, as she's on a completely different time zone than us. If you could please introduce yourself, Auntie Manu.
Aloha mai kākou apau e ku'umāhua. My name is Manu Aluli Meyer, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Mary and Janet. Aloha mai. Let me see what I do here in Hawaii. I was a professor, now as a philosopher practitioner. Now I'm into cultural agroforestry. It's time. So basically, we just had 30 kids over here just for the last 3 hours. That's why I just took a quick shower. And we have 8 acres up here in the secluded Oahu, where Max and the gang came a couple of times, and they really worked hard. And it's an honor to be here. Now I work in cultural peacemaking practices called Ho'oponopono. It's a different type of Ho'oponopono that's not traveling around the world. It's an old version of what is traveling around the world, but it's an honor to be here, and I'm grateful to be here, Max, and I look forward to listening to hearing what you folks have to say. So aloha mai.
Thank you so much. We're surrounded by amazing panels as well as amazing community. We're amongst friends and allies. This is not always the case. I feel that sometimes in such great ecosystems that we forget that the idea of diversity and inclusion in any space, let alone the sciences, is not always the norm. It was actually quite radical for me putting this event out publicly, how much public backlash we actually got, a lot of hateful commentary, a lot of inappropriate reactions. And it just kind of going into this is our first fundraiser, really excited for the turnout. We're really grateful that all of you would share the space with us and engage in this discourse. And we're really excited to pave a road forward together. But it was really grounding for me. I practiced this as part of my work, both professionally and personally, through my nonprofit work, through my work with the city. I do my best to diversify the space. And you in New York, in such a diverse multicultural space, you sometimes forget that you're coming up on a national, international scale against a lot of pushback, that this is like some perverse, if not like baked in agenda to do something, and it's just bizarre, but it is real. So it does mean a lot for people to be taking time to talk about this and to delve into it a bit further. Again, people in the chat saw this, but feel free to put questions in the chat and I will address them during the Q&A. And if you didn't see already, we have a raffle going on. We are more than happy if people are excited to join that. Please feel free. And yeah, let's break right into it. This is a very organic chat. This is not a rehearsed event, as I'm sure you can tell. Again, this is a room with people I hope to share many more discussions with beyond today. There's no slide decks. There's no lightning round. There will be a Q&A, I suppose is a little bit formal, but we can kind of just talk organically amongst ourselves. And I think it's interesting because we're all kind of coming to this from radically diverse, but very relevant fields. I suppose something that I put to the panelists, existing within the broad spectrum of the sciences, what challenges do you find in sort of, we have this vision for diversity and inclusion within the environmental sciences and bringing more people into the space. where do you find challenges achieving that goal within your professional disciplines?
Oh, my goodness. Tell you a story. When I was 13 years old in New York, I was really good at science, and Columbia University announced that it was going to have an enrichment program on Saturday mornings for kids who are interested in science in high school. I asked my 8th grade science teacher, Mr. Eaton, if he would write a recommendation. And his answer was, well, Mary, I would, but you'd be taking the place of a boy who has a real chance of being a scientist. And the sad part was, I was 13. I didn't know. I didn't know of any, Jane Goodall wasn't famous. There was, so I just sort of thought, oh, and it wasn't until I got to college that I found my way back to science. That's a very extreme, to show you how far we've come. I mean, that was in the 60s when no one conceived of girls aspiring to the sciences. But there's still a lot of that. I mean, when I won a scholarship to study for a year in Argentina when I was in high school for the American Field Service. I came back mid-semester into physics class because I still like science. I just thought, oh, I won't be a scientist. Take these courses. And I was the only girl, and the boys also. This is terrible. Mr. Saltman used to tell dirty jokes, and now and swear. Now he won't. Now that you're in the class, and there's still that going on. I mean, even in my work, the New York Zoological Society, I'd often be the only woman in the room, and it was tough. And I was in the first class of women at Yale. And there were professors who would say we didn't belong. So I got it straight. I didn't even get it subtle, and I think that for some people it's crushing. By the time it was still hitting me in college, I thought, damn, I'm just going to use this anger as fuel for my own advancement. And then I went on to grad school. And so it's very personal for me. I think that when I was the dean at Macaulay Honors College, there's a big skew between men and women taking coding courses. And I went out to Harvey Mudd College, which has a very good record. It's a college that really emphasizes science. And I talked to the president, who's a woman, and I said, how do you get women to sign up for these courses? Because they're reluctant. They think, oh, I'll go into this coding class, but all the other students would be these boys who've been in basements, doing computer games their entire lives. And she said that she did two things. First, she made up brochures that had smiling female students, which had an effect. It had an immediate impact.
Really?
Yes, and she also she said there was a fantastic professor who managed to bring everybody into the discussions and build confidence. So I just grabbed him. I said, "Are you free in January during intersession?" He said, "Yes," and I heard him. Brought him out, teamed him with a CUNY professor so that we could start to do something similar. But there's no hoping. You have to do some specific actions to make women feel especially welcome, because it's not, as Larry Summers said, because we don't have the skills. It's because we've been made to feel so unwelcome that we have to have extra invitations.
I mean, I grew up in New York City and I went to Catholic schools, but I also had friends that were in public schools. My mom was born in the Bronx and went to public schools. So your story, it reminds me of, there's things that my mom had in school, in public school, that even going to a Catholic school, we didn't have. Like our science programs and classes weren't fully robust. They weren't like fully equipped. They really, cut things. I know like my friends, so folks that grew up in the 70s and the 80s here, even in some of our best schools still didn't get the opportunities to kind of have access, like you're saying, to the robust education or the connection to the practicalities of sciences. I mean, what I see now in working with folks that are either coming into farming or coming into agriculture or coming into food, even food sciences, how many folks, no matter if you grew up here in New York or in other parts of the country, how many folks have been systemically kept from quality education, quality access to equipment, and the encouragement to see like that could be. So, you know, I think it impacts us on a gender level for sure, and disproportionately, you know, folks of color and communities of color, I think get compounded by that. And it's ironic because like my mom went to college, she had a biology degree, and she talked about wanting to be a scientist, you know, for a career, but that's not where she ended up. And I think it's often that, like, not having the opportunities to take what's your passion to become what's your career, or even have a space in academia. And, you know, oftentimes I hear land stewards and growers talk about not just their excitement about learning about how to connect science to the work that they're doing in soil or on the ground, but it's also connecting back to the things that they've been taken from. And I think, you know, over time, there's a lot of times parents need to do well, and they encourage us to take different courses or, you know, think about different careers, and we're not really, you know, informed or told or thought or have access to or exposure to certain academic sciences, environmental sciences, or even just something as scientific as agriculture. And so for folks to try to find a way back, just think about all the years that you've been divested from that and all that's been taken. But, you know, I also see how excited or how people bring back the practices of Indigenous ways to what they're doing now. And it kind of brings them forward. But if we still continue to have these gaps, we're going to always have folks not being able to connect or see it as a career. And I would say the other parts of my work too is sometimes people think about equity, whether it's racial equity or environmental equity or economic equity at the end. They're not really trying to find ways to connect it to the source. Or they say like those issues are too big to solve, or we can't do that. So it ends up being the answer, which will then always be perpetrated. And so what you end up having is like what ends up being more performative actions of like, well, we got to diversify this class. Let's find that one Black person that seems to always show up. Or, you know, we have to diversify the faculty. We'll find that one person. That doesn't mean they're representative of the community. And we don't, you know, an individual's story or experience can be very different, even in communities, you know, of color, of access. You know, I think, you know, sometimes depending on what, even like myself, when I think about my life and my story, there's so many points of inequity, but yet there's also so many points of privilege that not everybody has had. So I grew up in the Bronx, and as I mentioned, we went to Catholic school. That's a point of privilege, but being a Black girl in a Catholic school doesn't mean you always have that access to privilege. You know, I come from a family who was fortunate to be multi-generations of college education, you know, education. My grandfather earned a master's degree in the 50s at NYU, and yet was never able to be whatever he studied for. You know, so there's this conflicting and ongoing disconnect between what is achievements that we're able to make, but then also what are the gaps in order to be able to just do the work or learn how to fail. Like so much of science, from what I see from folks, is the ability to experiment, the ability to explore, the ability to travel, to see other experiences, the ability to research, the time to research, the affordability, you know, somebody comping that. And if you don't get those opportunities, you're so far removed from the learning and the experience and what you're able to bring back. And I'm gonna stop talking because I also want to make time for Manu, but I just think for me, it's the disconnect between supporting and nurturing folks in those early developmental stages, where those actual connections are so critical, but then seen at the contemporary times when we then say like, well, now we want to incorporate diversity, but you almost are then it ends up still being performative because one, we're not addressing the root of getting folks in, but then we're also sometimes not doing the homework to find folks that maybe didn't get a chance to get the degree, but have that experience. Like there's so many land stewards that I know, or so many folks that have somehow found their way to school or working part-time, trying to do, a job on a community garden or urban farm, and still trying to connect their school experience all together, doing it at once. And if you don't have those same opportunities, then you don't get to be, you're not seen as the same person who can apply for this job or that job. And there's still a lot of barriers in academia, as well as nonprofit, like doing this work too.
Of course. Yeah, to perhaps loop onto Manu and then kind of squish two things I picked up there, which I think are really, really quite big pieces of this puzzle. There are fields out there which are very classically known to be very undiverse, like coding and programming have radical gender disparity in them in terms of who we actually see there. But as a practitioner in the environmental sciences, both, this is of course anecdotal, but I'd like to say that I've collected a decent chunk of data working with GROW, actually creating those opportunities, creating those milestones where people can get exposure to professionals like Auntie Manu. They can work in the field, they can see what they like, they can see what they don't. We can cover those costs, we can help to open up that bottleneck. There's certainly just such a across the board interest in the environmental sciences. It's not a lack of people of any demographic that are excited to do this work. Rather, there are systematic barriers and there are opportunity barriers. And a term that I absolutely just am over the moon with that Auntie Manu taught me is this idea of radical collaboration. And this idea that perhaps it is on us as practitioners, as people that have gotten over that event horizon and now have some authority in the field, that now have some capacity to make these opportunities available. Like, how can we make that space for people that we want to open up the sector for, whether it's in our own practices or whether it's collaborating together with each other's practices? Perhaps you could share a little bit on that, Manu. Oh, sorry. It's the magic of digital communication, people. You'll love to see it.
While you're doing that, I also piggyback on what you said is, I think what I've noticed in my work, and I noticed some of the chat, there is an obvious thing that I currently have another job that I'm doing that I can't really speak on professionally right now, but I just want to take acknowledge that for the folks in the room. I could talk about it when in person. But what I have seen throughout my 11 plus years in this space is it's not just short-term touch points of trainings or opportunities. I think that can open a door or be of use or a spark. But what I really like about the GROW Externships is the ability to have ongoing connections, ongoing relationships, ongoing experiences. I think that's really what helps folks connect the dots. Not just, I went to one program and they did it for like one day, like, this is a program that gives really, you get practical experience, relationships, but then you get to be on the land, but also you get to build partnerships and collaboration. That's so important.
I think that's the key. Absolutely. I come from a completely different space, gang. We absolutely, my job is to reframe the whole kit and caboodle. As a philosopher practitioner, we do not want to belong to this youthful society of America. So I think Krishnamurti is my favorite philosopher. It summarizes it so well when he said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." So what I get from this is that all Indigenous means we in Hawaii have been colonized and now we're occupied by the Americans. And we're at a different place now where we're very clear about the disease that's hit us. And we've named it historical and cultural trauma. So gender, when feminism came here in the 70s, we're like, go away. You know what I mean? women are absolutely, we are a matriarchal society, and women are just, it's not the issue here. But the issue is the thinking and how Americans frame the issue. So is it Kiana? Is that your how pronounced? Nice. Kiana. The ongoing pilina, we call it mo'o. The mo'o is the concept of continuity. That's all Indigenous epistemology means, is continuity. Continuity, continuity, continuity. If you do not have continuity, you do have these, you know, these flash in the pans, and there's no relationality. So the number one issue, the number one currency for continuity is relationality. And that is through friendships, that is through experiences, and that is through trusting. So yeah, we are Hawaiians. Do you think non-Hawaiians started the food sovereignty movement in Hawaii? No way. They made it into Whole Foods came to Hawaii, but the Hawaiians, that's not a food sovereignty movement. That's a capitalistic movement. But the movement is in our Hawaiian communities. And over 22 years ago, a friend, Kukui Mauna Kea IV, started a movement because in a community that absolutely nobody thought would survive. And this is where the flowering of our food security movement is. It's called Ma'o Organic Farms. So we've got something completely different here in Hawaii, and America has been kind of a really, really mediocre collaborator, except Jerome and Max. We're getting better. Yeah. No, because I'm telling you, it's radical collaboration, or everyone goes or nobody goes. But and Max has been very good about how we do it in our 8 acres here, and how we do it at the University of Hawaii West Oahu. Because now I just want to plant coconuts. Just coconuts, come on, you guys, because we've dumbed ourselves so down with American thinking that we actually think coconuts is a liability. Coconuts are a liability. Absolutely wrong. So first of all, I want to tell you that I really appreciate this opportunity, but diversity for us is about healing. It's not about putting, a brown face in a white room. It's not about race. It's not about race. It's not even about gender. It's about the essence of what continuity means in our systems. And that means reframing how we see the issue. Because I don't want equity. Forget it. I don't want Hawaiians oppressing Hawaiians because they got PhDs. I thought I did, because I went to Aotearoa to be with Linda Smith, and she had 500 Maoris with 500 PhDs in 5 years. And that wasn't it. That did not help them. So it's not higher education. The higher education systems in America, I think, are collapsing with irrelevance and with not seeing they're still silos. So transdisciplinary, I love the solidarity economics. Absolutely, absolutely key. We call it sharing. Because they always say the Hawaiians bartered. We're like, no, we never bartered. We shared. Okay, all right, you guys. There's a difference. So unless you have that frequency, that currency of exchange, that is of pilina, of relationality, you will not know what I'm talking about. So that's why it's taken us a couple of years, Max. Yeah, and it has. These guys just drove me nuts, but they really, really adjusted. And because we are different here in Hawaii, we absolutely are different. And that's why I really appreciate this opportunity. But I've got to run in about 10 minutes. So it's such a joy to be here, you guys. That was fast. That was too fast. Arr. Arr.
We'll have to do more of these. We have a few minutes.
Yeah.
For
That's
it.
the plan. Nice.
What we'll probably do is we'll continue onward, but maybe, although it's a little bit unorthodox, if you'd still be willing to do the outro acknowledgement, Manu, and then perhaps we'll do a bit more talking. But something I think really interesting in all that, although perhaps not the most sciencey example, I think a lot of challenge people have in general, whether they're trying to enter the sciences or not, is there's a lot of nervousness around trying new things. I know I felt this a lot during peak COVID. I needed small electrical work done in my house, and I'm gonna get electrocuted if I touch wires. When I'm building green roofs, it's like, oh, I can't do that. I don't have a green thumb. I'll never be able to do that. And with coconuts, which you brought up, and I think a lot of us have context of food.
Yeah.
It really goes a long way to have these touch points that people aren't intimidated by, that people find connectivity to, whether it's because it's the essence of life, whether it's cultural relevance, whether it's historic relevance, or whether it's just something that feels more approachable to them than these like what people sometimes consider as trade disciplines, that they look at the environmental sciences as something, this mountain they have to climb, and how from the bottom could they ever get to the top without investing dues and time and degrees. So I wonder what within your practice, whether it is coconuts or otherwise, what are those sort of olive branches that you hope to help expand more people into the discussion? Please.
No, I'm happy to share. I definitely want to give on to you.
Yes.
No, what do you want to say, Kiana? Absolutely.
Oh, no, I definitely want you to have the time first before we talk, since you only have a few more
Yeah,
minutes.
because we're gonna just be around.
Yeah, we'll
here,
just
so
be here
we'll-
talking, but we want to give you
I
the
have
floor
ideas,
first.
but I'll wait.
No.
Well, first of all, science needs to change, but what I've just pivoted as a professor for 30 years. When you step out of the university, but I'm still in it, my job is to indigenize the university. And I always tell people it'll happen next week, Tuesday by 3. You know what I mean? So what that means for me is connection to community and awareness of the needs of community. And you could summarize science in a process called Hilo or Kilohana, the idea of a type of quality of empirical awareness. Kilo is to see. To see for us is Ike. Ike is to see. Ike also is the word for knowledge, and Ike means to be given revelations. So we see knowledge as a hologram. The idea that there is a dimensionality to knowledge production. It's not only mundane empirical rationalism, but a regenerative logic that includes the needs of community, the currency of relationality, blah blah blah. I can go on. So this is a time to redefine sciences, and as women, we can't just want to fit in, and as people of diversity, because they try to teach us that, what did they say in the 70s and 80s? Oh yeah, tolerate diversity. Like, what a low bar. Really? Tolerate diversity? That's just ridiculous. We marry diversity. We scold diversity. We make fun of diversity. Difference is what we have in common in Hawaii. So we're at a totally different ballpark around American thinking of diversity, because America is basically black and white. And then, the little peppering in between. But here in Hawaii, look at me. I'm Hawaiian. You know what I mean? My father is from Belleville, Illinois. I'm the whitest Hawaiian I know. But I am, my kupuna and my roots are deep, and my purpose. If you could summarize Hawaiian epistemology is in 2 sentences, it's simple. And if you can summarize our science, the genesis of our science is love land, serve people. Or wait, it's love people, serve land. That's the hologram. Ta-da, bump it up. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, don't take scholarship too seriously, because as an epistemologist, the word piss is in there. And so we should have fun with that word.
Thank you so much for that, Auntie Manu. And maybe to be conscientious of your time. And again, I'm sorry we're running a little bit late. It's things happening in the New York Minute. We have people moving around and all this excitement, but to keep us grounded and also to really be respectful that there's a lot of pieces to diversifying the space. And part of that is acknowledging history and acknowledging the land and acknowledging culture, rather than having be a concept that we pull on and off the shelf as it's convenient and as we think we're going to get brownie.
Totally.
Though it won't be the true closeout, if you could do a quick closing acknowledgement.
I'm gonna put it in the chat, everybody, so that we can all learn something very simple together. Uluae, uluae, ke velina, a ke aloha. We believe that aloha is the primal source of our collective regeneration. So, you know, it's all this fancy dancing work with the Hawaiian epistemology and indigenous epistemology that develops into holographic epistemology. It just boils down to love. That love is our true intelligence. So this is a short chant that we can all learn together. And please forgive me, I do have an appointment at 2 down the hill. So uluae kevelina a keloha. Can we all say it? Uluae kevelina a keloha. All right, so I'm going to sing it once and you're going to sing it with me 4 more times for a total of 5, because 5 is the number of healing. So we're going to, every time we say that love is the practice of an awake mind, that's what it means. Loving is the practice of an awake mind. Time to love. You know what I mean? It's so time. Okay, don't you think? So time. Girls, boys, everybody in between. Let's go. Let's learn how to love better. All right. So just go and listen, and then listen to me for once, and then we're going to do it 4 more times for a total of 5, because loving is the practice of an awake mind. Let's awaken ourselves. Okay. And Max and Jerome, mahalo nui no ko ike nahe nahe. Thank you so much. I look forward to continually working with you folks, because young backs are really good in the Aina Vela up here, the hotlands of Palihua. Mahalo nui. And Mary and Kiana, well done. I just keep doing, and let's meet each other one day, okay? So, okay, so listen, and then let's do it all together. Yeah. Coco, you ready? Here we go. Uluae kevelina a ke aloha. 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 Mahalo nui. There was a breeze that just walked through my window. So that's a ho'ailona. That is a sign for you folks tonight to enjoy each other's company. Okay, so thanks, Max. Thanks, Jerome. Bye, Mary. Bye, Kiana.
Bye.
Have a great night. Have a great night, gang. Aloha mai. Thank you for this.
Thank you. See you soon.
Aloha. Aloha mai.
Aloha. I mean, hard to follow.
Babo.
Let's acknowledge, just take a breath.
I think one of the things that
Please.
is so delightful
Mhm.
about Auntie Manu is she has her academic background, but she brings wisdom. You know, and knowledge without wisdom is dangerous.
Yes,
And
yes.
one of the, as she was talking about the Americans do it this way, I was thinking, yes, in my experience, American and Western European academics tend to stay in their lane. They think that they can't borrow from a philosopher, as you saw her do so easily. They can't, whereas in Latin America, in India, in Southeast Asia, you'll find that academics, even if they're in one discipline, they'll borrow from another. And I'm part of a network of elders. It's called the International Biodiversity Network, and we're the leaders of, or retired leaders of organizations for conservation. And we just wrote together a letter to the New York Times because their coverage of the Ukraine in terms of what's going to happen with a tactical nuclear war talks about it as if it were a political or warfare issue and not a global environmental disaster. And yet we were all ecologists, but it was led by our ecologists from Brazil, India, and Indonesia, who sort of step back and say, hey, wait, you
Yeah.
know, let's ask them to reframe. And I think that that's why, that's another form of diversity, is to have people with great knowledge from the Pacific, from Southeast Asia, from the subcontinent, from South America, from Africa. That's another continent that you would think had no people and was invisible from the coverage of paper, but there are so many, there's so many people with knowledge and wisdom there. So it's a big challenge, as you say, from the get-go, to start reframing issues that bring values and wisdom into the practice of science, because the values are there. They're just really attenuated values that are the ones that are in too much of American science. And I just wanted to make a note in passing, because I thought we were going to be talking about sort of climate change and representation.
Absolutely.
And,
Please.
yeah, and the last in-person climate change conference. Well, let's see, back in COP2, that's a conference of the parties. I think I told you when we were having a phone call in 2001, the ratio of male to female professionals deciding on forestry and energy projects was 11-1. At the last in-person climate change conference in Madrid, COP25, I forget which year it was.
It was within the past
21.
Yeah, very recently, 2021.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, 60% of the government delegates and 73% of the heads and deputy heads of delegations were men. Now we have to remember that in the rural countryside, up to 90% of the food is produced and the resources are collected by women. And there has to be a better match between the lived experience of people coping with climate change and the people who are making decisions for them.
Perhaps something. Oh yeah, please.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's such an honor to hear from folks from the ground in Hawaii, and especially hearing from aunties.
Yes.
Because I mean, for me, it's an additional special touch, because there's so much that I've been inspired and learned from my connections with folks on the ground in Hawaii, and that continued connection on kind of like what you were saying, Mary, like the importance of weaving our, our academic experiences and learning, and with like the true Indigenous practices and how to address the issues of right now. We have grown up so long, and most of us so often, with these like capitalistic, patriarchal approaches, where there's so much in Hawaii, there's been a form of resistance. And not that we don't have other forms of food sovereignty and resistance here. It's become pockets, so that but most of us have grown in our systems and expectations. And I think when she says like reclaim the sciences, it's like, how do we do that? How do we authentically, intentionally connect to what we're learning, and how do we change or inform it and connect it to Indigenous practice as well? And I think from what Auntie has offered and what you're offering, like when we say like Hawaii, Brazil, even like spaces like Madrid, like these are not just spaces that places are having meetings. Like this is where so much of the work on the ground, whether it's food sovereignty or environmental justice, not that we don't have our own Flints and New Orleans and California's and New York, coastal struggles, but there's so much that we could be learning from that are rooted in Indigenous practices and Indigenous ways. And instead of just saying like, let's opt out of that, let's stay with our colonized mind and our colonized practices and our businesses. But if we're finding our jobs, our opportunities, and weaving those things together, that's what's going to help us survive. If those practices helped communities survive for thousands of years, and yet we're living in this really small time with row-to-row crop, farming and other, like scientific innovations, where some have been great and some haven't. Like, it's interesting, when you take a step back to be like, well, how could there be communities that lived or thrived for thousands of years under oppression, under adversity, under different forms of climate issues and struggles, human and otherwise, and yet still are here, and we're bringing these practices back, and yet we've lived in, a relatively short amount of time since like, you know, the introduction of pesticides and such, and we're dying, we're struggling, we're not going to survive this way. So it's not just a desire because it's cool or trendy to kind of go back to indigenous ways and practices, or I think the siloing of our education and like these practices from the folks, like the reclaiming of sciences is a must if we're gonna survive. And if there are folks that are at those intersections, then whether it's me or you, like I implore each of us to think about that in our work. Because oftentimes I hear from folks like, well, I can only be an environmental steward if I have an environmental job, or I need to be in food or food justice, or I need to be a scientist in order to do that. And we're not going to survive if everybody doesn't see themselves as change makers and are waiting for folks like in offices or writing reports to like figure it out. They'll model it the hell out, but they're not going to, you know, if we're not putting it in the word, then it's not going to make sense. You know, like we're not going to survive. So I think when we, you know, it reminds me to be inspired, and not just in a like, oh, that's so awesome way of like our indigenous peoples and our indigenous practices that we're hearing and our stories and our lessons. It's like, whether it's indigenous folks here in the Americas, if it's indigenous folks, Mesoamerica, South America, Africa, wherever, it's not just to see it as that's a cute way to like feel like I had a moment. We need to really be reclaiming the sciences and bridging what we know in science and what we know to be true if we want to survive whatever is ahead of us. Because what we've done in these last 50, 60, 70 years is clearly killing us. And capitalism ain't gonna save us. Capitalism ain't gonna survive. And you know, getting on I had a glass of wine. So
no, it's important.
in the sense of like, you know, we can't just think of, well, let's just if we can't figure it out here on our land and this soil and this water, well, then we'll just figure it out in a controlled environment and then move on. And then, you know, that's where all the space and controlled environment stuff comes into play. Like, if that's going to keep folks fed, that's great. If we're learning how to survive for the multiple, that's great. But oftentimes the nutrition's not there. Oftentimes the connection to what needs to be true. So if we know that there's ways and practices that kept land healthy, kept folks fed, and communities thriving in adversity, then I think we need to find ways to incorporate that with our science and our models and our work, whether you work in admin or an accountant or, you know, in a city, you know, office, like it's what you can do as an individual off those hours, but it's also finding inspiration in ways that you can do it on your clock hours. I mean, in particular, folks in the trades, we oftentimes shun folks that don't go to like school, you know, college or PhDs, and I'm not marginalizing those folks. There's, you know, like, education there, higher education there, but we can't forget like the trades. We can't forget folks that have ingenuity and brilliance, and how do we connect that with all the other things we have brought to our plate? Like that's what's going to keep us thriving and moving forward. So I mean, I just encourage folks, whether it's Auntie Manu or other folks, like when people say like, I've learned from the folks in Brazil and Belo Horizonte, or I've learned from folks in, you know, Hawaii. It's not just, it's really interesting to see what America has brought to those places, and have ruined crops, and have ruined or taken away folks from their practices or their livelihoods, or the land or the soil or the water. And yet there's still folks that resist, and there's still folks that bring those practices back. Those are the things that we should be taking back, not just what we as a country say is the way. We need to bring back what they are continuing to do, because that's how they're surviving, if we want to survive. And that's a tangent, but hopefully connected.
That's very, very relevant. And thank you both for adding that. And I think something interesting there too, in this very modern and this very capitalist lens that we have, we consider, and I say this all the time, so not to say that this isn't like something that we all preach, is the environmental science is a new field. It's an emerging field. It's an exciting field, but it's kind of marred, and we're joined on stage and in the room and in the Zoom with academics. It's kind of marred in this very linear understanding, and I see it when I talk about GROW Externships working with developing professionals. That can take many different flavors. That could be people pivoting in their careers, that could be people in trade professions, that could be people coming out of retirement. But the majority, the lion's share of the people are young people that are still in academia. And I feel there's almost this academic death spiral in that people are concerned that they can't get employed in this new field because it's difficult to get in this field. So then they think they need to take on more degrees, and then they take on more debt, and then they still perpetually feel unqualified. And I think a lot of the remedy to that, as you guys both mentioned, is there's a lot of holistic practice, just connecting it back to not exclusively, though it is relevant and valuable, it's not merely an academic trade. It is a real trade, is a hands-on trade, is a cultural trade, is a historic trade. This is one of, if not the oldest profession ever. It's one of the most, if not the most human thing you can do, is to steward the land, is to take care of the planet itself. And it's very important to give these opportunities for people to get that connectivity, as well as to ensure that in that building out of the field, which we, as well as the people in this room, as well as the people in the room, are part of developing this field in this modern context, to make sure it doesn't become this very, very sterile, very, very gated, very, very expensive, very, very homogenized field of professionals that can only manage to get umpteen PhDs or stay on this track forever, or have the resources to kind of go through the gauntlet eventually to make it through their professional years. I would love to, and as we get to the end of this, as we're running out of time, if there were any things that you could put in for the group, put in for the audience, whether they're aspirational, whether they're things that you wish to make the field more diverse, more accessible, whether there's solutions that you would pose to the professionals here, as well as to us as people that are trying to improve the space. If you could share your thoughts and dreams in whatever form you feel, I think that would be really valuable.
Well, I don't think there should be any hierarchy
Yeah.
of importance in the environmental
Yes.
realm.
Mhm.
It's really, if there ever was an area for horizontality,
Yes.
it is the environment. And someone who is an environmental artist who creates sculptures from found materials in
Yes.
nature, or creates music to inspire people. That is just as valuable as someone who's titrating, in a lab somewhere.
Yes, yes.
So actually, one of my saddest days was when Stony Brook University, which hired me to be the founding dean of their College of Sustainability, we had created majors in environmental humanities with tracks in history and fine arts and oceanography and no matter what your interest was in the environment, there was a place for you. And unfortunately, I was telling Marshall in the audience that after a year, it was 2008, when the market crashed. Capitalism was not our friend, and there was the did not come in, and they closed the campus because it was experimental and a little odd, so. But that is my fondest dream, is to create spaces where everybody brings what they do best to environmental conservation with love, appreciation, respect.
Thank you for that.
No, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I feel like if folks are really interested and invested and committed to, not just continuing to survive, but continuing to find ways that we can thrive, it really is this finding that way to continue to make those real connections. And how do we balance the structures that we are forced to live in, and building and supporting alternative models and approaches? And I think you're right, it's a lot of disseminating the hierarchy. And, acknowledging like that's not going to stop tomorrow, but, we're thinking about sustainability, or even converting that to resiliency. And I honor that word. I know there's some folks that kind of push back on that word. I really, I think we need to continue to find ways to intersect and honor and respect the different trades, sciences, experiences, and understanding the systems that we're working on or working to dismantle or work within in order to survive and to thrive. And I think that's like the way forward. So whatever your talent and your passion is, whether it's on an individual level, we won't, bring it in different ways, whether it's your job or what you do as a passion when you're not on work, because we shouldn't only just think about ourselves as work, but it's how we bring that authentic self together is if we have that collective power. When we talk about solidarity economy or solidarity movements, it's what we bring to the table, our whole self, our authentic selves, the privilege, the disconnect, all of that experience. If we can really build a place to honor that, then we can tackle the systemic. If we think one person's gonna do it, it's not. If we think just a small group of folks, we've seen that, it's not. But if we all start to see ourselves as bringing our whole experiences to that, then we'll be able to tackle. And then, like hopefully survive a couple more years.
Fingers crossed. I mean, with people like those on the stage and those in the audience and those listening and the many more that we're going to support, I have a lot of faith. And it's an exciting time to be change makers in the space and to be people that can help to support that. There's certainly a lot against us, but I genuinely have hope. And this effort today is part and parcel to that. I really appreciate all of you spending the time and sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate everyone in the audience, both digitally and in person. This is a milestone for our organization, which I consider you all very close members of. We are closing up our 4th year of operations. We're about to do our 4th cohort to Japan. This is an evolving discussion. We're very excited, and there's plenty more. If it was ever a good discussion, as this certainly was, you can't ever fit it all into one thing, and that means we're talking about something that's important. So I don't mean to make this go too long. Again, I appreciate everyone staying late. GROW Externships is excited to continue into the future. And again, thank you all for all you've done, whether you've tuned in, whether you've supported in even more dramatic ways, or hopefully are excited to collaborate with us further. We look forward to making many more milestone opportunities for developing professionals in space, to all the points and more that we've discussed here. Hey, have a good night. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to the dinner. Thank you for everything. Hello. Have a good one. We will send the recording out soon, and we will keep you posted on future events and activities.
Thank you. Thanks for everybody.